There was a lot to break down in this episode of JJK, from Geto's betrayal to Gojo and just so much more. So let's go ahead and let's jump into this and break down and analyze this episode of JJK. This episode basically starts with a year time skip from the previous episode, taking place 1 year after the Riko Amanai incident. Shoko and Geto are basically throwing a pencil and an eraser at Gojo. Basically, to understand what's going on here, Gojo has figured out a way to automate the selection of targets for his Jujutsu technique. And by the way, some of these scenes are so well animated, and really they don't have to be, like the way they animated Shoko's face here. I mean, you can see all of the extra detail, and it almost makes her look sort of uncanny. Like really realistic. And this will be used a lot throughout the episode, so look out for it. I'll probably bring attention to it. As for Gojo's new technique, he's able to keep Limitless active now, and with minimal resources to boot. However, interestingly, Shoko brings up that, well, with all of that always being on and active, won't it fry his brain? So basically Gojo responds is that because he's supplying it with the cursed technique that is still active within his body just naturally, over that, it pretty much cancels out the need to ever stop it. On top of this, Gojo has learned how to shorten his hand techniques to activate multiple instances of blue and red, and at this point, all he needs to do is figure out domain expansion and get this teleportation thing over long distances done. I mean, just absolutely insane. Over this last year, Gojo has done so much to train to become more stronger. And in my opinion, this was a response to Riko Amanai, because my theory is that Gojo took it really hard and decided to never let that happen again, and spent an entire year training to basically ensure that he wanted to be prepared and never unprepared if he ever was forced to face a man like Toji ever again. In other words, Gojo basically woke up to the dangers out there, which before he was too egotistical to notice. We then move over to Geto, and Geto really is most of the focus this episode, because while Gojo basically flourished, or air quotes flourish, Geto on the other hand took it really hard, has tired and dead eyes, and is just emotionally despondent. Interestingly, he mentions how they were all sent on missions alone during this time period, and this is important to note, as this suggests that Geto didn't need to be isolated on these missions, but instead needed someone to help cope and confide in. He was basically isolated when he needed other people the most. This is further backed up as Geto describes how he became basically a machine, absorbing and exercising curses constantly. This repeated over a year, which basically isolated Geto even further emotionally, as he feels nobody can really relate to what he has to go through, citing the tastes of the curses that he eats, which taste like, as he says it, sorry YouTube, the S word, and vomit. Yeesh. I could not imagine being in Geto's position, and honestly, I do feel bad for him. Even worse is that Geto is desperately trying to cope with basically his reality and soul searching, trying to relearn why he chose to become a sorcerer in the first place. We then see this close-up shot of Geto in the shower, and he's just a total mess, conflicted and at rock bottom as he continues to try and tell himself that everything will basically be alright, and to remember his original purpose, his grassroots. And the water here, the sound of which turns into static, is basically symbolizing his headspace, which is filled with static and unnecessary noise. This is the turning point for Geto, as he finally basically breaks and calls humanity, as he says it, damn monkeys. This entire sequence was meant to show that during his intense soul searching, he became isolated and needed someone but could not get it. And the sheer isolation made it to where he could never get outside of his head, and basically drove him literally mad. This continues with the newbie Hybara, who talks with Geto after his shower. Throughout this scene, Mappa does an amazing job, by the way, of showing the juxtaposition between Geto and Hybara. The broken Geto against the brand spanking new spunky Hybara. And we can see this in Geto's expression, as he is just devoid of life as he talks to this guy, and Hybara is just so full of life. Interestingly, Geto is worried about Hybara and the job taking a toll on him like it did him. And Hybara responds to this with basically saying that he doesn't try to think about it too much as long as he can be useful. That's all that matters to him. We then see the hollowed eyes of Geto light up, but then right back to a lifeless expression right after. Geto was basically, in my opinion, projecting what he felt onto someone else because he didn't want him to turn out the way that he did. In other words, he genuinely cares about Hybara, but he's just so jaded and broken at this point that he can't feel that anything other than him making a mistake here. Then we see this white-haired woman appear named Yuki Tsukumo, special grade sorcerer of course, and Hybara immediately says that she's cool, and because he's a good judge of character, showing how innocent he is, and then he just goes to leave, which is one of the last times we'll be seeing him, sadly. But Hybara here, to me, in my opinion, represented the past Gojo that was maybe more innocent and not jaded or broken by Riko and Toji. As well, the way they animated the scenes here, you can tell they ran out of budget or time, as some of these models are really low detailed. This would actually happen a lot throughout this episode, and honestly, I think a lot of people will be angry about that, but not everything can be animated perfectly, especially with a studio like Mappa, so we do have to be realistic at some points. All that really matters is that if they fix these things for the Blu-ray release, which I think they will. It's also revealed that Geto actually knows of Yuko, which lights her up until he reveals she's basically known for being, well, pretty much lazy and not taking any jobs. Yuki interestingly fires back and says that the school is basically only treating symptoms, and she, on the other hand, wants to actually do something and get rid of the problems outright, which is why she doesn't take just any mission. She basically wants to create a world without curses. And once again, this wakes Geto up from his malaise. Yuki talks about how she wanted to do one of two things in life. 1, eliminate all cursed energy, or 2, let humanity control the cursed energy. And Toji, interestingly, was an example of number 1, as he was the only person known in the world to have absolute 0 cursed energy. And while they discuss, you can see these past events play out in the window with a kind of convex lens. Very, very good looking artistic stuff. Honestly, as a person who read the manga, this scene was done so much better than in the manga, not because of they changed the story or anything like that, just because of the presentation. I think Mappa really does bring an edge to the anime where the manga doesn't, because the manga's art, I like the manga's art, but let's be real, Gojo kinda looks like a mess sometimes. And sometimes these chapters just don't do the character designs justice at all. But I guess that's what you get for publishing weekly, or close to weekly. As for Toji once more, Toji was able to perceive cursed spirits and energy as well. In turn, this would end up giving his body a hard resistance to curses. And Yuki tells him that he shouldn't feel bad for losing to someone like Toji because of this. He's just too powerful. He's too special. And because of Toji's rarity, Yuki is now seeking option number 2, which is let humanity control the cursed energy. She then mentions how cursed spirits aren't born from sorcerers. In fact, sorcerers leak very little energy, and basically, and this is the key word here, this sort of seals Geto's fate as she says this, everyone were sorcerers, there'd be no cursed energy. So, Geto immediately jumps to the conclusion, kill all non-sorcerers. And what that means is all humans. Once again, artistically, the sound of the water returns like static as Yuki tells him that all of this is actually possible. And there are two sides in Geto. That one, he admires humanity for its weakness, and as well too, a side that resents him being a sorcerer. But Yuki tells him that he's not at that stage yet. He's currently still deciding. As Yuki goes to leave, she tells him as well that there's already been another birth of a star plasma vessel, which probably doesn't help things with Geto here, knowing that they're all sort of expendable to a degree. After this, we see Nanami and a sadly dead Hybara. Geto, in an amazingly well done sequence, sees the blonde in his hand and realizes that the only thing left for them is the corpses of their comrades at the end of this road. And this was the breaking point. This was the final breaking point. Geto is emotionally traumatized and scarred at this point, And he makes up his mind on what he wants to do, and he goes, and he sadly does it. But I don't think people expected him to go to the lengths he actually did. So this breaks Geto, and he goes to a village to basically save the little sisters that we saw before in the series and slaughter over 110 villagers, which were all traced back to Geto, and this means he is sentenced to death. When Gojo reads this, he is in absolute shock as to what has he just read, what transpired. And it's even revealed that Geto went as far as to kill his own parents. That is how sinister and evil Geto is at this point. Gojo then balls his fist so tight that he bleeds. He's just in absolute disbelief. Geto was his best friend in the world, and he's just done something so horrible as to kill his own parents and 112 innocent villagers. Insane. Just imagine what it would be like to be in Gojo's shoes at this point. He's in absolute shock. It comes out of left field. There is no way you could, or anyone really ever predict that Geto would go down this path. Geto then meets up with Shoko, who tells her that none of the reports are actually false. He did all of those things. All the while, I love this because Shoko just nonchalantly takes out his phone and calls Gojo and tells them where they are, which I think is kind of funny, but also in a way sad. It shows that Geto doesn't care if Gojo is called here. He doesn't mind Gojo confronting him one bit, which is exactly what happens. Geto then asks a question. Are you the strongest because you're Satoru Gojo? Or does being the strongest make you Gojo? This is a very iconic line here throughout the series, and it's something that, as a manga reader, I will always remember the first time I read it. And then Gojo basically goes to kill him, but once again, he stops and balls up his fist. He's not able to do it. Afterwards, Gojo basically laments how he's not strong enough to save people. Obviously, he was reliving trauma from Riko and now with Geto. He's basically asking himself if he was the one to blame all of this. Is he the reason why Geto basically went over to the dark side? Is he the reason that Riko died? And if so, was it because he wasn't powerful enough? Was it because he didn't do everything he could? Did he do everything he could? And that's really what an extension of this question is. Are you the strongest because you're Satoru Gojo? Or does being the strongest make you Satoru Gojo? It's a very, very huge point in Gojo's character throughout the entire series. So we then see Geto take over the religious group, which was once a part of the group that put a bounty on Riko. All the while, Gojo takes in Megumi. And then finally, at the end of the episode, Gojo wakes up in 2018. If you enjoyed my breakdown and analysis of this episode of JJK, then please go check out my previous breakdown analysis on episode 4. I appreciate you all watching, and remember to become a Patreon to financially support the channel. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.